Return to study session. A motion second to return to study session. All in favor say aye. All right, I think I heard enough. What is the council's pleasure for item 2? I think this is yours, Councilmember Durham.
I move we proceed as discussed in executive session, including settle for the amount discussed in executive session. Okay, we got a motion second. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? That motion passes. And I think, Councilmember Durham, item 4 is yours as well. What is your pleasure on that? Same motion. I move we proceed as discussed in executive session, including settle for the amount discussed in executive session.
Got a motion second on that. Any discussion on that matter? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, that motion passes.
Hey, Your Honor, these were the two budgets that went, these are the two things that went under budget?
Yes, they did.
All right, beautiful.
Combination of RTA and our Tucson Department of Transportation. All right, let's go to item 5, primary jobs incentive for Project Celebrity. Item 5, Project Celebrity has applied for the primary job incentive. The staff will present the results of the economic analysis for the project. I believe it's also on the agenda for us to make a decision on this. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, this is a follow-up conversation. We do have a recommendation for the council to move forward with the primary jobs incentive. I do have Juan Pablo Valdez with us, and he'd be happy to answer any questions or go over any of the info that you'd like. So it's up to you, your pleasure.
JP, if you want to make a short presentation.
Yes, sir. Honorable Mayor and Council, it is my pleasure to present Project Celebrity for the primary jobs. Staff has reviewed all the criteria. A third-party economic analysis has been conducted by Applied Economics, and it overwhelmingly meet and exceeds all the criteria with a $94 million capital investment, 595 jobs with an average salary of $68,875 per year. We have a direct impact to the city of Tucson in the next 5 years of $13,622,000, and over the next 5 years with $35 million impact. Our incentive package would be a total of $219,000 to Project Celebrity.
Okay, I believe this is Councilmember Scott. I believe this is in your ward.
Yes, it is, and I just wanted to comment that this is something that has been sorely needed in the Ward 4 area. Currently, there are no beds, hospital beds, within the borders of the 100 square miles that is designated as Ward 4. So if a person needs to be in a hospital bed, they have to travel many, many miles and a long distance to get to such a bed. And I think that this will provide help and relief to those people whose lives may be endangered and need to be housed in a hospital situation for a while. I want to thank the people who have come forward to make this a possibility, and I sincerely hope that my colleagues will vote wholeheartedly to offer this as a great reward to the people of Ward 4 who've been waiting for a long time for such an investment of this kind. This is going to be very, very welcome in our area.
I'll take that as a, Councilmember Scott, I take that as a motion on your part to recommend that
I move the manager's recommendation.
Second. A motion and second on this item. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right. Staff will return with their...
And may I add something, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
I just want to congratulate the City of Tucson, our Economic Initiative Office, and our City Manager, and Councilmember Scott, because I know for a fact that you've been working hard to attract a facility such as this to Ward 4. So congratulations to all, and I'm looking forward to, what is it, 500 and something jobs. That's pretty amazing. So looking forward to it, and well done, everyone.
Yep, good progress. All right, let's move on then to item 6, which is the economic analysis and recommendation for the Union on 6, scheduled for 30 minutes. Time has been set aside for discussion of the economic analysis for the Union on 6. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is the results of the GPLET economic analysis for the Union on 6. I think our memo is pretty self-explanatory. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any. I know this is in Ward 6, and Councilmember Kozaczek has been deeply involved in a lot of the discussions. But happy to answer questions, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Kozaczek?
Yeah, no questions. The direct benefits exceed the foregone property tax, plus which the parties have worked hard together on the community benefits agreement, which they've agreed to, and that is subject to this being approved. So I'd move that we pass the GPLET.
Second. Okay, we've got a motion and a second to go ahead with the GPLET on this project. Councilmember Romero.
Councilmember Kozaczek and Mr. Mayor, I'd like to just include the importance of what the community benefits agreement means to this particular development. I want to congratulate both the developers and the people, the team that they put together that worked with the community and made sure. I just wanted to mention how important it is that the community benefits agreement is creating space for and incentivizing really space for local businesses by giving a good rate to local businesses and defining what local business means. I also want to highlight that $100,000 will go to the Historic 4th Avenue Coalition for parking and streetscapes. They will be meeting 4 times a year, and that's in the community benefits agreement. And one of my favorite is to prove that they are a transit-oriented development. They are providing 50% reduction in transit passes, and I think this is a model to continue working with developers throughout the infill incentive district to promote transit-oriented development. So I just wanted to add that.
No, thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. If there's nothing else, all in favor of the motion say aye. 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 Anyone opposed? All right, that motion passes. Thank you. All right, let's move on then to item 7, which is the primary jobs incentive for Raytheon expansion, scheduled for 20 minutes. Raytheon has applied for the primary jobs incentive. Staff is going to present the results of that analysis and ask for our recommendation. Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, again, this is a follow-up. These are conversations that have happened many times in the past. This primary jobs incentive is recommended by me. It is for Raytheon and the expansion. I've given you all the data, all the info on the value and the magnitude of this investment. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know that Vice Mayor Priebus has been working on this as well.
Vice Mayor.
I want to thank staff, Mr. Mayor, for the work that they've done, the due diligence they've done to ensure that this is a benefit to the city and it's a benefit to our community overall. And with that, I'd like to push the manager's recommendation.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second to approve the manager's recommendation. Any discussion on this matter? Hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Excellent.
This is good, Mr. Mayor, for the city of Tucson and for the community overall.
You guys better slow down, or we're gonna have a couple hours. Let's move on to item 8, which is the GPLET rent collection and distribution policy, which is scheduled for 15 minutes. Staff is seeking direction regarding revisions of the GPLET rent collection and distribution policy. Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, some time ago I brought to you an idea, I'll even call it a concept, of charging lease or rent for GPLETs. Since that time, we have had conversation with Pima County and some of the districts that they would like to have their distribution of in proportion of what they would otherwise receive for property tax. I think it's a very reasonable request. That is the spirit and intent of property tax and the distribution, so I am recommending that. I've given you more information in my memorandum, but I'd be happy to go over that in any detail you'd like.
Okay, anybody have anything on this? Councilman Romero.
Mr. City Manager, can you explain to us how much is the rent for, and how long does this take place and how it will be distributed to Pima County so that they can distribute to the school district and others?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Romero, the way that the current structure is, I've recommended 10% of the what the property taxes would have been and what is abated. So that's basically the rent or the lease payment for the abated period. So that's generally 8 years, so it would be 10% over years. That's the cost to the property owner. My recommendation per this proposal is to distribute 90% of that back to Pima County for distribution to all of the entities that currently receive property tax, so all the districts, all the folks that would otherwise receive property tax. So it's a proportionate share, if you will, that would go back to the county and the districts.
Anybody else have anything on this?
Yeah, I just have one more question.
Okay.
Can you give us an example of what that would mean in terms of collected funds?
Sure, I should have brought an example. I didn't think to do that monetarily. So let's just, we'll kind of walk you through it. So the way that the GPLET works, it has to show that there's value based on the investment and the value of the property that goes up. So my recommendation had been to charge that entity 10% of the total property taxes that they would otherwise pay.
The total property taxes of the land itself, or the
Correct.
land with the asset?
The land with the asset,
Okay.
because if you recall, the abatement is for the entirety of that property tax.
Yes.
So it's 10% of that during that abated period. Once we establish whatever that amount is, and that's a function of what the abatement or what the taxes would have been.
Okay.
Once we have that, then I'm recommending that 90% of that be given back to the county for distribution on a proportionate basis to the rest of the entities.
Okay.
Okay, anybody have
You're welcome.
anything else? Councilmember Kozaczek.
Why would we be using our rent payment to cover administrative expenses used to distribute money to the county? Why not keep our 10% and then add those administrative costs on top of that?
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Kozaczek, can you ask me that
It
again? I'm
says
sorry.
that the city would continue to keep 10% of the revenue for staff time used to process the applications.
Correct.
Why wouldn't we, so the processing of the applications is chewing up our rent. If we want 10% rent, we should take 10% rent and then deduct the processing and administrative costs off of the county's piece.
I actually think that's more transparent.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that, to be honest with you. I was looking at 10%, give it back to the county distributes it proportionately.
Yeah, but you're saying
We'll get a
it's
piece
going to
back.
cost us something to do the administration. Do you know what that is?
So keep
All right, so let's just make sure that maybe I apologize if I
I
didn't
could be
make that
reading it
clear.
wrong too.
So 10, and the 10% might get confusing. So 10% is the amount that we would be charging for
Right.
our cost. So that we take that off the top. We send 90% over to the county. They distribute 90%, whatever that number is, back proportionally to all of those that would otherwise get property tax. We're one of those.
Are there administrative costs for us doing that?
Yes, that's the 10% that I'm charging, or that I'm recommending that we charge for that.
I'm not trying to play stupid with you. I'm just.
No, I get it. I apologize if it's confusing. All I'm suggesting is we would take 10% for our administrative costs as
So
a
we
part of
would-
that rent.
So at the end of the day, we're netting 10% of the rent.
Correct, plus whatever our proportionate share of the property
So
tax
they're
would be.
going to remit something back.
That's
to us.
correct.
All right, that's
That's
cool.
correct.
Go ahead. What's that? We do.
Move the item based on the manager's recommendation.
Okay, we got a motion and second on this item. Anything else, Councilmember Cunningham?
Your Honor, we don't really have to do this. So listen, follow my thoughts here. We actually don't, we have no obligation to do this for the county. And so giving them, only keeping 10% may not be what our actual limit is. Unfortunately, if we discuss it too openly, we're in a situation where we compromise our position from from a negotiation standpoint. So I don't know whether or not this is better in an executive session scenario to discuss what our actual leverage is, because we actually we're giving back 90%. We could charge 50%. I'm not saying we do that, but I'm saying we could charge 50% and give them 50% and say, take it or leave it, pal. I mean, that's kind of how I'm looking at this. And, you know, it's our GPLET. We're the ones who have to go through that whole process. We're the ones who set up the whole GPLET. So I don't understand why we have to give all the money back. So that's kind of why I understand that the county wants their share, and I get that, but I feel that they're kind of strong-arming us here. And maybe we can negotiate with them. So I'd like to recover some of our negotiation costs. And now I don't really know what the legal ramifications are. I want to stay within what the statutes allow us to do as far as GPLET goes. I still want to stimulate economic growth here, but are we getting the best deal possible? That's the question. I know if we've already got an agreement with the county and we've got some handshake deals and stuff like that, again, we can discuss that too, but I'm just not sure we're getting everything we want. And do we have a back door on this if we decide that we're kind of getting the short end? Or I'm just asking.
Well, is it fair to say that the 90% figure reflects the property taxes lost by the other districts? Are we trying to make them whole? Is that the goal?
Mr. Mayor, first, Councilmember Cunningham, and I'll come to Councilmember Kozachik. There's no deal until you approve it. So we've had conversations about this. I've talked to the county about this, and so there's no deal yet until you approve it. So that I just want that clear. Councilmember Kozachik, it doesn't make anyone whole because we're not charging full 100% of the abated amount, right? So if we were charging 100% of the abated amount and then they distributed it back, then they would be made whole. All I'm suggesting is that proportionately it's distributed back to the districts on what they would have gotten otherwise based on proportion. That's all. So we're making them whole with that smaller piece, but it's not the full dollar amount that they would have otherwise gotten.
And Mr. Mayor, members of the council, one thing I could add is that in instances where there's a GPLET but no abatement, statutorily this is what happens to the GPLET payments. They get assigned to the taxing jurisdictions based on these proportions. So this would treat the rent that we negotiate during an abatement the same way as if there wasn't an abatement in the first place.
And 10% is the max we can pick?
Well, it would be based, that's roughly the equivalent of our share of the total property tax amount.
Mr. Manager, do you have a sense of what the city's, so the 10% is the cost, I'm good with that. Do you have a sense of what the county's remittance percentage was? What I read was 45% to the school districts, 45% to the county. Of that 45%, how much of that comes back to the city?
Mr. Mayor, I apologize. I don't have those figures committed to memory. Think of it this way. It's just basically whatever the property tax chemistry is now on the tax bill for these particular properties. So if they've got, they're part of the college district or part of whatever school district, those are distributed back on a proportionate share.
Yeah, and I don't think the issue's ever been the districts, because that's separate and pretty easily identified even on your tax bill. But the rest of the money goes into the county general fund. What percentage of that do we see back?
We would see, Mr. Mayor, we wouldn't see any back if it's proportionally what they would get anyway. I mean, it basically is general fund dollars that are there to fund the county. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm not following your question exactly.
Yeah.
I generally agree with Councilmember Cunningham that we really don't have to do this because other jurisdictions don't do this. I think that it is a good gesture to do this with and work with the county. I like the idea of returning some payment to Tucson Unified School District because this is the district for TUSD. If it were AMFI, we're Flowing Wells or any other school district. I generally like that idea. Can you share with us what spurred this conversation?
So, Mr. Mayor, and we'll take a little bit of a step back. I think the premise for this is that we're starting to charge the rent, because if you remember, originally it was zero. You know, when we started having this discussion some time ago, we charged no rent, and I suggested, hey, maybe there's opportunity to start charging a little. So that is the, I'll call it the hammer or the leverage that the council has, is you don't have to charge. That's a council policy to do that. And so over time, we might charge less, we might charge more. It really is a policy discussion that can happen down the road. So that's one thing. The other thing is, because of, as the city attorney mentioned, for the non-abated property tax GPLET agreements, because those are distributed, I thought it important to at least have a discussion about this. And as started having a conversation about this, the original thought, quite frankly, was we'll just distribute the money ourselves to the districts. But we're not equipped to do that, because that will, you know, it's a function of on an annual basis what their rates are and so forth. And so what I thought was, let's use the county's infrastructure to do that, because they have the infrastructure in place to know exactly what the rates are, they know what the proportions are, and it's just a lot easier that way. So that was really the conversation.
So go ahead, Councilmember Romero, and then Councilmember Cunningham.
Okay. I generally, I think this is playing nice. I think it's, you know, charging the rent for GPLET to make sure that we're paying our cost in terms of staff time was generally the idea of, for charging the rent, the GPLET rent. So I feel as though if this gets us to a good place, make sure that we're building the relationship with Pima County, make sure that they're reciprocal with their treatment of the city of Tucson, I feel generally good about it. I like the idea, to be honest with you, of sending a little back to the school district. So I feel comfortable moving forward. It would be nice, Mr. City Manager, to have an idea of what, to have something written down for all of us in the future, for us to know, okay, in this example, this is how the money would be distributed. So I'll just ask for that.
Yeah, it'd be nice to know just in a general way how much money comes back from the general fund within the jurisdiction of the city of Tucson each year, because even though this is a very little amount, that would tell us if we send over $100,000, we know the district's getting 45, we know the county's getting 45. How much of that? Because remember, it is our taxpayers who are paying in this money. All of this money, in fact.
Mr. Mayor, just so the point of clarification, and I apologize, I was looking at some of the data. Pima County's combined tax rate's 35%, TUSD's 43%, and then all others are what's left. So that kind of gives you a sense of magnitude.
This would include Pima College and
all of the
library
others, all the other
districts,
folks that are out there.
Councilman Cunningham.
So I'll say this, I'm good on this for now, but if we feel that we're not recovering our costs next year, maybe we can revisit and look at whether or not it's 15 or 20% instead of 10%.
Is that where you were?
Mr. Mayor, I will absolutely keep an eye on it, and you can guarantee that if it's not working, we'll certainly bring something back.
Is that where you were, Councilman Rose?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I was going to say, we could do this now and then in a year bring it back and look at it in review and see what it's doing. The other question I ask is, how is Maricopa County dealing with this, with their GPLET situation in their revenue distribution?
Mr. Mayor,
You know?
Vice Mayor Fimbres, I'm not familiar with it exactly. I know some entities have charged rent, others have not, and I don't know where Maricopa falls into that, to be honest with you.
Can you find out later?
I will. I'll find out. I'll get you some more data on the percentages on the various districts, obviously in the downtown area, and I'll find out about Maricopa.
So do I need to amend my motion to accept it with bringing it back with a year review?
Sure, go ahead.
So we'll do that.
And then Shirley, did you have the second? Councilman Durham, I know did you have anything on this?
I answered my own question.
That's the best way always. I'm sure you got it right, too. All right.
Just generally fine.
Okay.
So really to simplify it, we started charging rent, and all we're doing now is divvying up that rent in the same percentage that we would otherwise if we hadn't been.
Right. All right. We've got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? That motion passes. Let's move on to item 9, which is the Complete Streets Policy, scheduled for 40 minutes. Staff has an update on the Complete Streets Policy development. Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, this has been an ongoing conversation with you. Interestingly enough, as we went back to our records, it was exactly 1 year ago today that this item was brought to you. It was January 23rd, 2018. This is not only a report, but also we have some suggestions on where we're headed from here. I'd like to turn it over to, is it Shelley? Or Diana? Diana Arlacona, our Transportation Director, to make a brief presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, City Manager. I am going to turn this over to Shelley, but just before I do, I wanted to take a moment and recognize her leadership and bringing this here. And she's done an excellent job. I came in October and said, hey, I really want to get this before y'all in January, and she hit the mark, so I wanted to make sure that we recognize that. I also wanted to thank the folks from Living Street Alliance for their partnership in bringing this forward as well. So with that, Shelley, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to keep this brief. So just an updating kind of reminder of where we're at. And so just on January 23rd, 2018, you had requested staff to move forward with developing a complete streets policy. So you asked transportation to work in collaboration with community stakeholders. We partnered with the Living Streets Alliance to assist with our community engagement and development of our policy. On September 25th, 2018, Mayor and Council approved the Complete Streets Guiding Principles, which include safety, accessibility, land use, equity, diversity, and inclusivity, environment and health, and economic vitality. And since September, city staff has worked with our community stakeholder group to develop the Complete Streets policy based on those approved guiding principles. On December 19th, the draft policy was provided for public review on the City of Tucson Department of Transportation website. Social media platforms were used to encourage the public to review and provide input, and comments were taken through January 11th, and the draft policy was revised to reflect those comments. We provided a copy of the draft policy to the National Complete Streets Coalition for review. They have indicated it is a strong policy. I'm going to say close to 100 if they base it on points, which is the expectation out of our director. They indicated that it was a strong policy and touches on all of the recommended elements that include vision and intent, diverse users, commitment in all projects and phases, clear accountable expectations, jurisdiction, design, land use and context sensitivity, performance measures, project selection criteria, implementation steps. So we were able to meet individually with each of you in your offices and Mr. Mayor, and you were able to review the draft policy with us, as well as us providing a copy of this draft policy in December. So today provides another opportunity for our Mayor and Council to provide comments and changes they would like to see in the draft policy. And we are scheduled for February 5th for Mayor and Council adoption of the Complete Streets policy. So upon adoption of the policy, we will be coming back in 90 days with the suggested structure for a Complete Streets Coordinating Council, which is the community side. We will work with your offices and the Complete Streets Task Force to develop that structure. Within 6 months of adoption of the policy, the Technical Review Committee, which is made up of all representatives of different departments within the City of Tucson and other groups such as Pima County Health and Pima Association of Governments, will start the development of a Complete Streets implementation plan that includes the chart outlined in the draft policy. Transportation will also start the hiring process for a Complete Streets project manager and begin the development of both the Complete Streets design manual and the mobility master plan. A draft Complete Streets design manual will be completed by September of 2019. So that concludes my quick overview of where we are so far, and we are open to questions and comments.
Let me start. I only have really one suggestion. I don't think it necessarily relates to what's in front of us today. I think what's in front of us today has been well thought out. You can tell a lot of input, but I do see an opportunity here, and I want council to consider it. I think it might come back when we're at that 90 days, when you're talking about the suggested structure for the Complete Street Coordinating Council. This is the way we need to go. This is the future, but we don't need another committee, okay? And I think we have an opportunity here to take some of our existing transportation committees, whether they're bike and ped, whether they're transit, whatever they may be, some of the road guys, and let's see if we can put that into this overarching committee because part of Complete Streets and part of what we're moving towards is to address every user's need, whether it's motorcyclist, pedestrian, transit rider, and then have them all make those decisions together. And that would be best accomplished if they were in the room talking to each other, as opposed to having 6 different committees that meet. And so if council is at all favorable towards that, that would be the one thing I'd like to see, and I think it would be a benefit to all of us. Councilmember Romero?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I completely agree. Actually, that was one of the questions when we met at the Ward 1 Council office. I said, well, you know, we have a pedestrian commission, we have a bike, we have a transit task force, we have CTAC, we have all of these different commissions and committees that meet on mobility issues. And so my question in terms of this coordinating council is, first and foremost, will it be mayor and council appointed individuals? Will it be individuals that are already in the transit task force and the bike ped and all of these other commissions? And will it be a coordinating council that will be kind of looking at the entire vision of what we do in terms of transportation, transit, and mobility in our city? Because it should. It does take time from not only staff and administrators, but it takes time from individuals. And if we have a transit task force not talking to the bike and pedestrian, and now this particular council, then I don't think we would have a comprehensive, well organized approach to our to what we're trying to do with this particular. So just think about it, at least to see as you're thinking of how to put this coordinating council together. Maybe bringing in a few members of each of the other committees so that they can give you input and see if they can work together and make it make them the coordinating council. Either way, we have to coordinate what the transit task force is talking about, what the pedestrian committee or commission and so forth and so forth. If there's no appetite, if it's going to be too hard, then I would suggest that they meet at least quarterly, all of these commissions, and talk about our vision and how we move this particular conversation for the future. I also just want to thank TDOT, Living Streets Alliance, and the city manager's office for moving this on this particular Complete Streets vision that Mayor and Council first brought back in January of 2018. I'm excited for what this means for the future of how we do business in the city of Tucson. This is a really progressive, forward-thinking vision for our community, and so I really commend you for moving on that. And one question or comment that I'd like to add is, you know, Ms. Alarcón, you come from a position where you were the Director of Transportation and Mobility. And I think I asked at the Ward office too if there's any opportunity for our department to become the Department of Transportation and Mobility. I hope you push on that. I have several questions, but I don't know if you want to give some time for others and then come back to me, Mr. Mayor, how you want to do it?
Let's do that.
Okay.
Councilmember Durham?
That's a good point you made, Mayor. I agree.
All right, you're counting them up. So the only thing is, I think you're probably going to get that sense from us, I think. But I know when we've tried to do this before, you know, it's like, well, wait a second. You're going to take 2 of us. What happens to the other 5? And so you're just going to have to think that through. But I'm going to go to Councilman Kozaczek. I think you had, were you?
Oh, sure, fine. So the frustrations that I shared with you are similar to what you've just heard. It feels very process-oriented. I don't want us to get so administration heavy that we're chewing up all the money we should be spending on implementation, on process, on administration. when I read the proposal, the draft, I was, as I shared with both of you, I was expecting to see design standards, not more process. And so whatever we can do to help expedite and streamline getting to the actual design standards is going to be great. I mean, we know we're going to wind up with a policy, but let's not keep spinning our wheels getting there. I'm wondering if there is something that has already been accomplished through the Living Streets Alliance outreach that we can adopt now as community standards and not have to wait another 9 months to do that. So perhaps that's something you guys could look at between now and whenever you come back. Because they've done the workshops at I think all of our offices. They've heard from the community. They've heard design recommendations. So there may be some things that we can implement ahead of the actual manual so that we can start putting some of this stuff in play.
Okay, Councilmember Scott?
And I just want to know where the money is coming from. Is this a new addition to the transportation budget? Will it be reimbursed by the federal government or anyone else who's interested in this project?
So this is actually a refocus on how we spend our existing funding. So we traditionally have been a car-centric community, and so we would focus on funding all of our projects that help to move cars across our community. And now we're talking about a relook at the existing funding that we have and making sure that it's looked at in a broader sense of all of the users of the roads.
In addition, there's going to be a Complete Streets project manager. Is that a new cost that is not or is included in your budget?
It is not a new cost. What I've done is I've looked at the department as a whole, and I've actually am in the process of reorganizing the department. And I have a vacant position that we're going to reclassify for this position. So I am not asking for any new positions.
So all of this falls within your jurisdiction, well, within your budget.
Yes, ma'am.
But you will be taking money from some projects that are car-oriented or not?
No, really what Complete Streets does is it allows us to look at all the modes and take them all into consideration when we're talking about how we design the road. So it's giving us a design manual, that this is the overarching policy. The next step is the design manual, where we definitely will use best practices in putting that together. And that's actually going to help us shape how we design the road from that point forward to make sure that there's safe movement for everyone on the road, no matter what the mode is.
Okay, well, I'm certainly in favor of moving forward with such a vision. I think it's great, but I think we have to keep in mind that in some areas of town, let's say maybe Ward 4, there isn't a lot of opportunity for people to do anything but drive a car. Right. And so we have to allow for that as part of the overarching review, because we can't concentrate on one part and forget about the other. That's my only point.
No, and I agree with you 100%. And what's great about Complete Street is it is context sensitive, so it's based on how the street is currently feels and the design of the land use that's around it. So all that's taken into consideration when you're talking about creating the appropriate modes.
Including, let's say, buses.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let's go back then to Councilmember Romero.
Thank you. I think too about doing soon, as opposed to planning, and then never doing. So I tend to agree with Councilmember Kozachek's comments. In terms of design standards, is that what you're talking about when you talk about a streets design manual so that we can put to use? When did you say that was going to happen?
We plan on having a draft ready for council to review in September or sooner. We'll try, but that's pretty aggressive. There's a lot of community outreach that needs to be done as well as part of that process, because you're talking about a different conversation on what the street can feel like. So we are going to look at best practices that are being done throughout the United States and then start from that. So we're not starting from scratch. We're going to take some of the best practices that are already out there and then start that community discussion about how it needs to look and feel for the city of Tucson.
And how is that process going to work with our updating of the major streets and routes plan?
That's all going to fall in. So part of this also includes the mobility master plan, and that's going to all roll in together. So
you're working on updating all of these standards so that we could tell people who are developing this is what it needs to look like.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you intend to continue working with small businesses, neighborhoods, schools, churches, additional community on putting all of this together and getting it done in September?
So one of the things is really going to be, over the next 9 months, is really going to be a strong focus on community engagement. So getting out and getting involved in the community with what's going on. Instead of them coming to us or setting up a meeting, we're going to be targeting more of going out to events that are occurring so that we're able to have the conversation. So we're going to be going out to the community versus them coming to us.
So
we're going to be pretty aggressive about it.
tabling at events,
Yes,
getting surveys done.
Correct. When there's
email,
and when there's opportunity
online.
at parks, like if there's a big soccer, league happening on a Saturday, we'll be out there with the table so we can have the conversation. So we're going to find new ways of engaging the community and not do it in the typical way.
And how does this, how do we work with this particular project and the current voter-approved Prop 407 funds? Because I know that we have connections there.
Correct.
Is there any overlap on that, in that type of funding?
So the Prop 407 already has exactly where the improvements are going to happen and what those improvements are. So those are pretty set, but if there is some design that may support it, we would, but I have a budget that I need to stay within, so I have to be very sensitive to that.
Okay. And then last but not least, how can we make sure that we are looking at potential funding, federal funding and state funding for this particular program in our city?
So Complete Street does open up some opportunities to where we might be able to go after some grants that would not otherwise be available because they want you to focus in on that, identifying the modes that'll happen on the street. So we will definitely be targeting those grants that maybe have not been available. The Complete Street Coalition actually offers a lot of grants through their organization as well that they pull down through the Federal Highway Administration. So we'll have some opportunities to tag that as well.
That's great. Thank you.
I'm going to go to the manager and then back to Councilmember Kasachi.
Mr. Mayor, a couple thoughts. Number one, we'll certainly bring back a structure on we'll call it a holistic Complete Streets committee or commission. I think there's opportunity there. I think some of the concerns in the past have been if we try to combine everybody, people's voices might get lost, et cetera. So we'll work through that. We'll have discussion with some of the stakeholders and see if we can come up with a structure that works. The other thing I wanted to mention is, by definition, Complete Streets is a holistic approach. And so when you look at the efforts that are ongoing, Prop 101 is pretty finite in terms of pavement maintenance and so forth. But Prop 407 gives us some opportunity, as Director Alarcon mentioned. I think there's opportunity to approach it from the design early on. And given that we've got constraints in terms of budgeting, I think that's one of the factors. But I also think that the guidelines are there, and that gives us an opportunity. The last thing I wanted to mention, and hopefully Diane doesn't mind me mentioning this, she did approach me and ask me how married I was to the name TDOT. And I said, I'm not at all. And so she is already pursuing some stakeholder conversations internally, mostly with the staff, to talk about the refocusing of the department. And with her reorganization in the near term, you may have a different name for that department. So we're really excited about that, and I wanted to thank her for her leadership on that. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
I always like the name T-Dot. Remind me of Polka Dot, some other stuff. Councilmember Kasachi.
Okay, so let's understand that we're talking about design standards, and that does not necessarily mean that the project has to become more expensive. It's how we're spending the dollars. And so the RTA also needs to be understanding that when, even though they may be the major funding source for a major corridor project, that as long as the city of Tucson is the lead agency, then we're going to be the lead dog on the sled and driving how that corridor is going to be designed. We understand we've got a budget, but some folks in that group, for instance, are completely asphalt-centric, and we need to be suggesting to them that there are better ways to design corridors, transit corridors, that don't necessarily cost more, but might make them more inviting for all modes of transportation, whether it's on foot or in a car, on a bike, or whatever. So I don't think we should get fixated on this may be a budget-busting set of policies. It simply redesigns the corridors in a way that makes them more inviting for more than just cars. That's where we're headed.
All right, I'm going to go Councilman Cunningham and then Councilmember Fimbres.
So there's a few things I wanted to bring up about Complete Streets today. First of all, I want to commend all the people involved. This is the type of document that creates good government. We talked a lot about process in this document and how we're concerned that this is one of those documents that can cause us to get mired down. I actually think the opposite. I like the fact that it's open-ended enough that we can interpret it. It gives us flexibility for projects to adapt. That's a really important piece to what's going on these days. Nowadays, we can send information much faster. It used to be, if you needed a drawing of something, you'd just send it to the guy who'd get a drawing, who'd get a print, who'd get a copy, who'd get it back to the other guy, who'd give it, and then you'd get it about 7 months later. Nowadays, you can sketch it up on a digital PDF and send it out by the end of business. Because of that, projects can adapt easier, changes on projects can adapt easier, and we have the opportunity to create basically what is a living document that allows Complete Streets to not just live by specific standards where you have to have 3 feet here and you have to have 2 feet here, but more guiding principles. The number one guiding principle on this document is safety, which is long time needed. It's a big part of one of the biggest, a lot of people say, hey, fix the potholes. A lot of people say, look at the cracks in the road. Why don't we start talking about the safety of our streets, especially with our pedestrians and bikes? This document gives us the opportunity to do those things. It gives us a pathway. Not only that, we really don't know what kind of flaws it has until we get it enacted. And to the point, process, nothing gets done. The best thing we can do for this policy today is to pass it and to get it done. And then if we need to tweak it later on down the road, we will. But let's allow this document to guide us as we make all of our streets more safe, accessible, equitable. We maximize land use. We create a better environment. And all of our projects have economic viability, which is, by the way, the 6 guiding principles of this document. And so I think this is going to be really special. I think this is something that's going to be very Tucson special. The last thing about renaming TDOT, please don't rename it Go-Go O Pueblo. I already trademarked that. Other than that, let's get this thing done.
Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I want to congratulate everybody who's been on this plan and been working on it, coming up with a viable document. It's going to be a living tool for us to learn and work on, and I think the last component is evaluation. How we're going to evaluate what we've been doing, the progress we've been doing, so that we can show the community that we have been, the safety has been utmost and paramount, because we've seen a lot of the fatalities and injuries that have occurred recently on our roads and our streets. So the evaluation is going to be critical of what we're doing, but I also want you guys to vet a little bit more about this, developing a project prioritization tool. And I want to make sure that that's based on need, the number of incidents that have occurred in those areas, that we're talking about safety being paramount on this issue. And then the other question I have at caution is the committee and how you're going to make up the committee. Because then, you see the models that MAG has and PAG has, and people talk about weighted voting, that MAG has and PAG doesn't have, and then what we're talking about partners with the RTA, Pima County Transportation, their board, and us, and I don't know if you're going to name TDOT, but I got used to TDOT. But there's other things we can look at, and then be looking at the national grants, not only through FHWA, NHTSA, and things that we're talking about, try to grab into those, to get planning, technical assistance grants that will help us pay for some of these extra staff people. But I applaud the efforts, and you guys are moving forward, and this is right on the top, and I'll be looking at the how you're bringing this community back together.
Okay.
I shared my thoughts yesterday with the folks that came visit us about what we did with highway safety and how we got those groups working together. All right.
Okay, unless anybody has any more input, this is the time for it. We have scheduled this policy for formal adoption on the consent agenda of February 5th. I don't think I heard anything here today that would change what you intend to do. I think the next two thoughts are, how do we start structuring this committee and how do we get to the design standards? All right. Thank you. Great job. You're doing a great job, Diana. Thank you. We don't name one. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to item 10, which is the self-insurance proposal, scheduled for 30 minutes. Yay. Yay. Okay. Staff has an update on the self-insurance proposal. Mr. Manager, do you want to say anything before we bring Anna and
Sure.
folks up?
I've got Ana Urquijo and Art Godon here that will make a presentation. This is a continuation of a conversation that we've started actually probably 2 years ago.
You want to take a minute break while we get these rowdies out of here? You want to keep going? Speak up then.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is a continuation of conversations we've had regarding self-insurance. Just refreshing your memory a little bit, there's a distinction between self-insurance, which is a funding or financing model, and the plan design. Oftentimes there's confusion between those two. What we're talking about is the funding model on how this could look going forward. We've been working very hard on this over the last several months, actually last year. I am looking for some direction. We'll be bringing this back to you, I believe, with formal approvals down the road in the next few meetings. But it's important that you're aware of it and you understand some of the background on it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ana Urquijo.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Mayor, members of the council, as the city manager has stated, since last July, we have come around to your ward offices to plant the seed on the concept of self-insurance. We came to you in study session in September, received some direction, went back and did some research, went back out to you to visit your ward offices, and I believe have answered most of the concerns and have addressed all questions received. We come before you today seeking approval to move in the direction of an independent self-insurance model for the city of Tucson. At the last visit that we made out to your ward offices, we had finalized 2 possible considerations, and since then we've moved in the direction, as your communication reads today, on moving toward our own model, creating our own trust, and coming back to you in February with formal trust documents. We feel that the purchasing power required for an agency our size is something we actually have and can leverage our own control and decisions for our own plan designs moving forward. We believe we have everything. We did so much research as we went out, and I found that most agencies that form trusts and come together to form an overall trust are smaller rural areas. It's very common. We have some in northern Arizona, some in southern Arizona in Cochise County. But the fact that we are a large employer really allows us that autonomy to be able to go out on our own. The fact that we are unique and that we cover retirees further accentuates for us the need to seek that autonomy and create that independent trust. So we're here to answer any further questions, but we feel, again, this is only a funding structure. We continue to move forward with plan designs separately. We'll continue to move forward with Cigna, with our current contract in a different funding structure. We will come back in subsequent months with employee input on that design and any modifications to that portion. Today is strictly just the funding of our employee benefits moving forward, and that is what's before you today, is a decision to move in that direction.
Okay. Councilman Durham, I'm going to start with you.
I understand that I've learned since yesterday that the the disadvantage of the joining Valley Schools employee benefits group is that we couldn't get it done in time for fiscal year 2020, right?
Mayor, Councilmember Durham, at the end, the final decision was that it would require a competitive bid process to go through Valley Schools. There were several other indicators that we reviewed, both pros and cons to that. We felt that it may be a good effort to pursue that in transition to ultimately becoming self-insured independently, kind of quashing that learning curve, if you will, because they would have provided kind of an interim step for us. But ultimately, what was delivered through the Valley Schools meetings and communications we had a different indication that would not require a competitive process, and upon more research and legal clarification, we did find that we would have to go through that process to follow best practices. And it was our recommendation at that point that if we want to move forward with fiscal year 20 in a self-insured platform, we would need to move with what our ultimate goal would have been sooner than later, and create our own trust. I wouldn't quite say that it was because of timing only. I think that at the end, I felt this was the better solution for the city, because again, we do have everything we need to be successful in that environment and in that platform.
So if it offers equal decisions with regard to healthcare network and plan design, and it's most favorable with regard to staff administration and workload, why isn't it better?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Durham, I'll help you with my thought process on this. As I looked at the information, one of the concerns that I had and was not really able to get to a point where I was comfortable was how we would access our dollars in the trust or in the pool. And that's extremely important, obviously, because it gives us opportunity to do things in the future. And I'm not saying that we wouldn't have access to them directly, but I was nervous in the language that I saw in the agreement that would make it cumbersome for us to get. And quite frankly, I can't recommend that at this point. So when I look at that, it becomes, I mean, all of the other factors that Anna mentioned, I kept looking at that, and I had concern about that, because I want to be able to be able to come to you and have a recommendation that says we need to go in this direction, and I want to have absolute confidence that I can do that. And so that's why I'm recommending against that.
I think we're certainly large enough to get economies of scale and purchasing power, et cetera. How many covered lives are there currently? Insured people total?
I believe we're close to 15,000 covered lives. 12 to 13.
Yeah,
12 to 13.
that's huge.
Okay. Councilman Romero.
I like the idea of an independent city benefits group. But my question is it more expensive to become an independent city benefits group on our own than it would be joining another group?
Mayor, Councilmember Romero, not necessarily more expensive. I think that the savings that we expect by moving away from a fully funded or a minimum premium, just in the administrative costs and cost avoidance, is sufficient for us to move forward, not necessarily any different than we would have expected to receive with a Valley Schools Trust.
So if we become an independent city benefits group, can we open the door in the future for maybe a Southern Arizona benefits group where we can join and have much more purchasing power with other smaller towns and jurisdictions in Southern Arizona?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Romero, absolutely. So one of the discussions that we had internally, and keep in mind, we've been having these discussions for almost 3 years now, was really looking at other groups that are out there today, and is there a way for us to join forces and take advantage of the economies of scale? One of the challenges with that is your actuarial, the histories and all things go along with that. The benefit structures have to be similar in order for them to be compatible. And rather than wait and have those discussions, my whole thought was, let's go off, and the original conversation was the Valley Schools would be an interim step. And after we looked at it, said, let's just jump in. We feel confident that ultimately the efficiencies that we gain, we can turn back into reducing our overall cost structure. But the door is still open for those conversations in the future, so that we can take advantage and hopefully, quite frankly, help others take advantage of the economies of scale. But first and foremost, we have to get our plan in place and our trust in place in order to do that.
I like this recommendation. I have seen the performance of the Tucson supplemental retirement system versus the Arizona retirement system, and our funded ratio is what? What is our funded ratio for TSRS? 76 versus the Arizona state, which is what? 70? No, I think it's in the 30s.
PSPRS.
Yeah, PSPRS, I'm sorry. And Arizona is right in the 60s? Arizona retirement system? I'm not too sure. But anyway, my point is that TSRS and our board have been diligent in making sure that we are the city of Tucson and its employees get the best end of the deal. And that's what I like about this city implementation. As long as we leave ourselves open to the possibility of creating a Southern Arizona benefits group where we can leverage purchasing power in the future and still be making the decisions for the group in the future. So I like it. I will be voting to support this and recommend this.
Okay, Councilmember Scott and then Councilmember Fimbres.
I just wanted to ask when this might come back and how long it might take at this point for the final product to be ready to go. Will it take more time because of financial contributions needed to make it sustainable? Or is it because we need the time to make all the details clear in the process?
Mayor, Councilmember Scott, we plan to have this ready for the new upcoming fiscal year. So all of the seed money that we're projecting to need to at least initiate our trust and begin to build our reserve will be included. And we'll come back in February with our budget discussion to describe how we're planning to establish that initiation of that fund.
Is there a certain amount that's needed as the basis on which you could implement such a program? Like in the reserves, how much do you need?
Yes, I think we're targeting the $5 million initially in the initial fiscal year.
Thank you.
So we're looking at 2020 joining the Valley School Employee Benefit?
No, Councilmember Fimbres, Vice Mayor Fimbres, we didn't. No, it wasn't the opportunity. It was the final, as we said, the final recommendation was to go independent and not go with them because of a competitive bid process.
We're going independent as a standalone, but could we look at Pima College, the University of Arizona, TUSD, Amphi School District, Floyd Wells School District, and Sunnyside School District is coming in as a collaboration and a partnership with us to do this simply like we did back in the late 90s when we had Pima College and the city of Tucson looking at this jointly as a healthcare. My concern with joining groups out of this area is that it's like PAG and MAG, you get one vote on this, and that's going to affect us, and we're probably going to be the biggest client provider, so that's my concern with that. And then the funding and the cost is another concern I have on this issue, but and then the services. And the other question I have is, how are our labor groups that are now with us, how do they feel about this process? and what are they saying? What are the pros and cons that we're vetting with them also?
Mayor, Councilmember Freeman, just a couple of clarifications. So going independent would allow us all votes in our Board of Trustees to be specific to our structure. Joining with other local entities, as you've mentioned, the majority of them are self-insured already. The college and universities are bundled in with the state of Arizona, and others are self-insured. So we are the largest employer that remains fully insured or under a different funding structure. Correct.
The question also is, how do retirees become a challenge?
Yeah, they are a challenge.
I mean, this is something we promised them and committed to them when they retired. So why are we having down here as a challenge to retirees?
The fact that we have retirees is a challenge to others to accept us to pull in because we subsidize the majority of their rate structure as active employees. So the challenge comes in when we consider having others joining us. So we have plenty of opportunity beyond this first step to try and formulate some better plan designs or plan structures to accommodate some of those perceived challenges. In terms of our labor groups and our employee communication, we're in the labor council meetings, we've had much of this discussion. We've clarified that this is strictly a funding structure change and nothing in and of itself having to do with plan design. We do have plan design meetings and surveys and input coming up this next month as a result of our rate structures and plan designs for those labor groups, and those will begin within the next couple of weeks.
You said all employees will get a form or a questionnaire to ask them about how they feel about this process?
That is correct. We're working on some surveys.
Councilman Cunningham.
There were 3 goals when we set out for this. There were 3 goals because one of the things I found out was that our premium was higher than the national experience in claims, and our premium was substantially higher, about 27% at one point. So I had some concerns about our whole plan. We've changed vendors a couple times since 2011, and we've curbed some of those costs, but we're still not below the national average. And I think when we take a look at the self-insurance plans, 3 things have happened that I've seen on some of the networks that have already made the change. Number one, we have the opportunity to put more money into the employee pockets. Right now, the employees pay a portion of their premium, and if they have all their kids and their spouse all on their plan, they're coming out of pocket as much as $245. Our employees are. Not only that, that's per paycheck. Our end of that can rise to almost $15,000 to $17,000 a year on top of what we're paying. Not only that, if we switched plans and we're self-insured, we have an opportunity to lower that. We also have an opportunity, because we're running it ourselves, to incentivize the idea of moving to alternative type plans and more 21st century friendly plans like HSAs. Now, I know that sounds like a bad word because it can be perceived that there's less coverage, but sometimes it just allows you to build a smarter patient. If you allow yourself to have wellness, if you allow yourself to use generic drugs, your premiums can go down substantially with those type of options. I'm not saying we have to make everybody do it, but we can incentivize people to. The second goal we should try to reach is to improve employee community health. The employee community health is the holistic health of all of our employees. And again, we can offer our custom-made incentives for people who are taking care of themselves. We can actually make it worthwhile for people who work for us to also visit some of the fitness centers and recreation centers that we have within our park system. And so I think that's a big part of one of the things that when we set this goal. The final one was to save on the employer share of premiums, which I think we can absolutely do even by achieving those other 2 goals. And that's why we want to go it alone. I don't really want to collaborate with another organization unless we're running it, because I just don't think I think that we have a unique population and a unique set of employees. We also have the amount of employees where it makes sense for us to run it for now. If we need to unblend for retirees later, we can't do it for people who are right near retirement or have already retired. If you're 10 years from retirement, then, you know, it's possible that we can have that, we can talk to labor groups and say, hey, you guys may not get grandfathered in, but everybody else who's put, you know, 20, 30 years into the city of Tucson and was expecting to be covered when they retired, we probably have to make faith on that. Nobody's saying that we don't do that. No one is saying that we don't do that. If we do those things and we achieve those goals, I'm of the belief that not only will we improve our employee community health, we'll also save money in the general fund from premiums. And the best part is, if we incentivize some of the alternative 21st century plans, it's going to put more money on people's paychecks. That's a big piece of this, and that's the piece that we're losing. If your employee premium is $125 a paycheck, and I say, hey, go to an HSA and you can deposit $43, $44 in, and that's all it's going to cost you per paycheck, then now we're incentivizing. Sure, we subsidize part of the plan a little bit more, but if they're on an HSA plan anyway, we're going to save on the premium long term, so we ought to go that route. We don't have those options because the vendors we talked to, some of them weren't sure they wanted to go that route. I will say that I've voiced my frustrations with Cigna before, but they've actually been pretty good, transparent partners in this transition. And so as long as we keep moving that piece forward, I think we'll have those opportunities. Finally, if anybody's worried about catastrophic care, if anybody's worried about a situation where the bottom falls out of the boat and a family is faced with a healthcare crisis, these plans are set up so that if someone gets, God forbid, cancer or some type of terminal disease, that they're backstopped. And so I don't want there to be a misconception that that kind of coverage isn't there. It is. So that's why we're moving forward to this. Pima County has already made this transition, and they saved $11 million out of the general fund. At least that's what they claim. Even if we save half of that, that's a big piece for us. But the only thing that's holding us up is us moving this forward. We cannot rely on the feds, the state, or anything to do anything. Tucson has to stand on, the city has to stand on its own 2 feet, and the best way is to take control of our healthcare system.
I'm going to go to Councilman Kozaczek, then we'll come back to Councilman Romero.
Just to clarify, all we're talking about right now is a funding mechanism. We're not talking about plan design.
Correct.
That conversation comes when?
We'll initiate that conversation in February.
Okay, and my concern with the independent city plan was whether or not we have the staffing to pull that off. What's it going to do to us internally in terms of the new obligations we're taking on? And maybe you can kind of verbally flow chart exactly what functions we're taking on and how what that's going to look like.
Mayor, Council Member Kozaczek, primarily it's the management of a new board of trustees. And we do have contained in our plan, in our transition plan, to add staff every year for 3 years. And we will be beginning with the first in this current fiscal year and then add a second in fiscal year 2020.
And what are those staff people doing? Are they claims processors or what?
No, we will hire a third-party administrator for the majority. Cigna will remain our third-party administrator. It's really management of the trust itself, and that'll come through our benefits and pension office, and we will add staff there.
Do we have staff already in place to managing TSRS?
Yes.
And is there some overlap in terms of skill set or knowledge so that we're not building a huge administrative burden and reducing the amount of money we're expecting to save out of this?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Kozaczek. There is overlap with respect to the administrator position. That position is 50% funded from the general fund and 50% funded from TSRS. That position is me, so I will be responsible for the Board of Trustees for the self-insurance. I'm responsible for the oversight of the TSRS Board of Trustees, and as Anna alluded to, we will be adding staff on the benefit side to to ensure that the resources are there to carry out a proper implementation of this.
And what will those staff people do? What's their job?
So
Administer a pension trust fund,
So on the pension side, is it?
whatever, the healthcare.
So the healthcare, I don't necessarily have enough experience to answer that question because I don't know what is going to be needed. But maybe perhaps Anna may be able to share.
So that really speaks to my concern about whether we have the bandwidth to pull this off. That's my concern.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. We have the management of all of the separate, through our consultants, all of the separate contracts that we will initiate for our third-party administration. And other than that, things pretty much remain the same for open enrollment, for plan design. It's the management of the trust itself that's an added responsibility for the entire office. We are adding as well a deputy director for human resources that will have the primary oversight of all of that section, and we'll add 3 HR technicians over the next 3 year, 1 each year, to assist with any transactional amount of work or volume that increases. I don't expect that the volume or transaction level necessarily increases.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're not sprinting to get this
Right.
done and then overtaxing
No.
our existing staff to the point where they're just...
Anna, I'm sorry,
Correct.
Anna or maybe Mike, as I understand the role of the trust, I mean, you're really talking more kind of the accounting end, the back end,
Correct.
and some of the other people you're talking about hiring or to beef up the HR department in and of itself. You're not adding 4 new people to do this. This is really an accounting or 2 position. Am I understanding that correct, Mike?
Mr. Mayor, that's correct. And both Anna and I have experience with self-insurance. And one of the key pieces to this is it does take some bandwidth, to use Councilman Kozachik's term, to administer the trust. But that's really much like what Art just outlined, is making sure that there's meeting notices and all the administrative pieces of that. But also it does take some expertise in terms of watching the dollars. On the benefits side, we'll probably need some transition staff to go through this, but I don't see that as a huge burden outside, because if you think about it, the funding of the trust is not really going to impact the day-to-day operations of the benefit structure for the employee.
Yeah, but
it's a plan
at some
design.
point we get into that conversation about plan design.
Correct.
That's where...
That's the
where lift
discussion,
comes.
which would happen anyway, which is not necessarily related directly to the self-insurance piece of it. And so that conversation is where I do expect there'll be some need for folks or folks that have that expertise, but that's specific to the benefit structure.
Okay, Councilman Romero.
Then what I'll do, Mr. Mayor, is I'll move the city manager recommendation to direct staff to proceed with self-insurance and work with the city attorney's office to amend the Tucson City Code for the purposes of establishing a self-insurance trust fund and board, and that this would be an independent city implementation as we go.
Okay, we've got a motion and second. Councilmember Durham.
I'm all in favor of outreach and transparency, but if the decision to self-insure is independent of plan design, how does it really affect the participants, the insureds?
The actual
I'm asking that question with regard to the survey that you intend to do.
So point of clarification, and the city manager did catch that. So that alluded to the side comment regarding plan design that's coming up in February.
Councilmember Romero.
I would ask for 2 things. One, that city employees be maintained informed about this big change. As you mentioned yourself, it seems like there's nervousness with labor groups, and there's nervousness amongst city employees. I think it would be behoove us and you, administrators, to clarify as much as possible with city employees, just to inform them, this is where we're going, this is what it means to you. Absolutely. And the second thing that I'd ask from you is, I'd like to see what are our potential savings. I know it could change. I would ask that you be conservative in showing us the numbers, but I think that's a very big part of the puzzle and of the equation as we continue to discuss this move.
Very good.
All right, we've got a motion and a second. Anything else? Councilmember Fimbres.
No. I'll save my questions.
Perfect. If there's nothing else, all in favor of the motion say aye. Anyone opposed? All right, that motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move on then to item 11, which is the Pima Association of Government report. Does anybody have any questions about anything that is in the PAG report? I see that Mr. Mohigme is with us. Anybody have anything? If not,
just a quick one. The
sure.
RTA funding was discussed pretty extensively in the report, and I'd like this group to have an update on any proposed changes that are being discussed with respect to the RTA and jurisdictions, MOUs, or IGAs.
Okay. Farhad, come on up.
I understand there's talk about restructuring those for projects going forward.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Kozaczek, if I understood the question correctly, you're referring to utilizing additional regional funds. Could you please repeat your question?
I understand that there's a conversation that's ongoing that would result in changes to the way IGAs and MOUs between jurisdictions in the RTA are framed that would kind of rejigger who's paying for what and within the context
yeah,
of the project.
if I may. So there was a task force that is looking at projects, and they're looking at project reviews. So they started looking at projects within the first year of the 5-year program. Currently, they're looking at the 5-year program itself, and then they're going to look at the balance of the program. That task force came back with some questions, and we were able to respond to those questions through the Technical Management Committee. So I believe that's what you're referring to. So we're responding to the task force and trying to answer those questions, but nothing's been finalized yet. It's mainly trying to answer their questions, and I believe we're going to be doing that over the next several months.
Okay, so I don't believe we have seen any of those questions.
There were really questions from the TMC, and the TMC is trying to respond to those questions. So again, nothing's been finalized. It's still between the committees going back and forth.
I get it. So all I'm suggesting is that before the terms and conditions of MOUs and IGAs are finalized by that task force, we ought to have an opportunity to engage on those proposed changes here as well.
Yeah. So again, if I may, they don't have any authority to discuss terms and conditions. That's between RTA board and individual lead agencies. This is purely technical questions and technical policy issues. Obviously, the board and the leading agencies will have to weigh in on the actual.
Okay. Am I asking the question in the wrong fashion? Because feel like I'm playing 21.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure exactly, but I think if what Councilman Kozaczek might be referring to is the policy that's proposed to change some of the percentages, or at least define the percentages for some of the amenities and some of the other things. I think that might be what you're referring to.
Yeah, I don't recall there was any recommendation to make any changes that are significant. These are questions for clarification, so they're existing policies and response to existing policies. There is, to my knowledge, there's no recommendation for any changes at this point.
Okay, Councilmember Fimbres.
What PAG RTA projects within the city of Tucson are being affected by the current government shutdown? Do you have any, or are we still moving forward?
Unfortunately, as you all know, I think some of the impacts are currently unknown, and we'll see the impacts within the next probably 30 to 60 days. The most immediate impact is FTA funding. FTA is not protected and we've been able to carry FTA expenses for the last 30 days. If the shutdown continues any further longer, I think we won't be able to carry some of those. So we're in discussions with FDA to make sure that if there's any expenses that impacts our services, that we'll work with them to find an opportunity to utilize other funds. But currently, that's mostly related to planning-related level. So the impact that might potentially come our way is we might have to suspend some planning exercises because we can't carry that expense until there is a resolution on how they're going to pay us back for it.
How much longer can you go on without going?
It's I guess the question is we couldn't do it at all, but we're stretching our dollars. So realistically, probably another 2 weeks or so, but we're having the conversation and make sure that we don't spend more than what we can carry.
Good. And then how is the transportation safety targets determined by region, county, cities, towns, and tribal governments or otherwise?
Yeah, so the safety targets by federal regulations are required for the state to establish those targets. And then the federal regulation goes as far as saying that if as a MPO, as a region, you want to establish your own targets, then you're welcome to do that. Unfortunately, there's all these other unfunded mandates that comes with it, so the reporting and everything else. That's not funded. State is tapping into their own funding to do the updates as well as the reporting. So from our perspective, our targets are even much more, I think, aggressive to try to make sure that we improve safety. State's targets are a little bit more relaxed, but they're sufficient for reporting purposes. So we recommend to stay with the state targets to make sure that we don't put any additional unfunded mandates on the region. That's the main reason for it. And the targets, and they're kind of loosely defined as targets. They're not really targets, they're projections.
I had one final.
Sure, go ahead, Steve.
There was also a pretty good discussion about the 2020 census. Can you give us an update on where you are with
Sure, sure. So as you all know, it's obviously becoming even more critical to be able to reach out and communicate to the public. We've been able to work with our legislators, and there was actually a bill introduced, I believe yesterday, $5 million worth of funding statewide, and hopefully if that legislation passes, they would distribute those funds for outreach. That's still not enough. There are other states and other communities that have put in a lot more funding. Currently, we are roughly at that $250,000 mark for our pledge. As you all know, we had this conversation before. It's probably going to require a much larger lift for the community. So I appreciate what the mayor's doing, and I believe the county's taking some steps to help. So again, it takes everybody to get the word out, and we're really concerned about it because potentially, I think that the negative impact of that message is already out there, and now we're trying to come back and get everybody to understand that this is important to the community.
And so I saw that bill, but it didn't seem to indicate how those $5 million would be distributed.
I believe it was broken down to $2.5 million distributed to the counties, and then another $2.5 million distributed to cities and towns based on population.
You guys know what we might end up with? Doesn't sound like. Okay, thanks.
Of course.
Not much.
Anything else for Farhad? Councilmember Romero.
I know the mayor and Pima County are working on adding additional funds to the effort, but what is the Pima Association of Governments in terms of budgeting going to do to add more funds to the equation?
So again, our funding sources, because they're mostly federal funds, while they're not eligible for that kind of activity, we'll try to identify some overlap.
Okay.
So we've been able to have 1.5 FTE to focus on census that's allowable from FHWA's perspective. Obviously, the 250 that we've raised so far, at least the pledge that we have so far, that's going to help. We're going to continue, and we look forward to any ideas, any suggestions, and any help you can give us to raise more money. But I really, truly believe that's going to require a community effort to bring nonprofit sector to the table, faith groups, everybody else. We may have to do a lot of these things in kind and not necessarily with a cash contribution.
Is that 250 per fiscal year? So fiscal year
That was our target.
19, and then another 250, so that'd be about $500,000.
Yes, that was our target.
Okay. All right. So we do need a motion to endorse the recommendations of the PAG Director. Okay. Yeah. It's really just agenda item 5, which is essentially taking the unprogrammed money and putting it in the wildlife linkages in the pathways, bikeways, and sidewalks. There is no other money available, though, at this time beyond that, as I read it. So, all right, we've got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, that's done. Thank you, Farhad.
Thank you.
See you soon. All right, on to item 12, which is state national legislation or other regional committee items for discussion. The state legislature is back in session, and we have our emissary from the north who appears to be still smiling, which is suspicious.
Smiling because I'm back in Tucson.
There you go.
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, a number of updates today. We'll start with federal, and then I'll move on to state. First, at the request of Vice Mayor Fimbres, there was some questions about the shutdown and the latest on the shutdown. I can tell you that there were a couple of votes scheduled today in the United States Senate. One vote was on a proposal pretty much supported by President Trump that would include the funding for the border wall. There would also be another vote on a bill that was already passed by the House Democrats. As of now, I'm not aware of any vote tallies, but it was widely expected that both votes would fail. In terms of resources for affected workers, there's a number of handouts going out. I wanted to make sure Mayor and Council had these. First, I want to commend Representative Grijalva and his staff. They've been very aggressive in making sure that people across the community, and in particular furloughed federal employees and affected contractors, know what resources are available. So you'll see, I've just printed it out for you. This is all available on Representative Grijalva's website. Resources for furloughed federal employees. There's also within that same document a FAQ, a frequently asked questions list, that provides all kinds of information about local and federal resources available to help affected workers. And I've spoken with the city manager's office about how we can get more of this information out to the community. We are getting it out. I know that local media has been covering this, and I know we're looking at putting some items in Newsnet coming up as well.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to add something, Andrew, if I may. We have been talking amongst ourselves. I brought this up to the mayor and the city manager and a couple of my colleagues about the possibility of what the city can do for federal workers that are furloughed. I know that the community, the food bank, so many other organizations are doing their part to help people that are not getting paid. Many of these people that are doing their job without pay, like TSA workers. So one of the issues that we have jurisdiction over is Tucson Water. And so we're thinking of the possibility of requesting that the city manager work with Tucson Water and work with our public information officer to let the community know that we'd like to ask one of two things. And I'll put it up to my colleagues to, give direction on. One, the possibility of not charging Tucson Water bills or Tucson Water to federal employees until they get back pay, and then they could catch up with their water bills. Or two, that we give families that are affected by a federal employee's pay not getting to them a 50% discount on their water bill. I think that not having a water bill at all is very helpful, but I'll leave it up to my colleagues to give input. I really want to work on that today so that when we leave this meeting, we could potentially say, and we will resolve this issue and we will give a break to federal employees. So I put it out there. I'd like to make it, if I may, in the form of a motion or just give direction to the city manager.
Let's hear from the manager first, see what he might have
Mr. Mayor,
to add to
we're
that.
already doing some of that, so why don't we educate you on what we're doing, And then if you want us to tweak it, then we can have a conversation about it. So I'll turn it over to Andrew on that.
Yeah, Honorable Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Romero. As I understand it, Tucson Water has been providing additional extensions for federal employees. We've been getting those requests. I believe we've already processed additional extensions for a little over 100, approximately 100 federal employees who have asked for it. I know that the customer service representatives have the authority given to them by their supervisors to extend that further if necessary.
So when you say
that's already underway.
So when you say extension, it's Councilmember Romero's first suggestion, which is that we will not charge you your bill until your paycheck resumes, and when it does, you'll pay us back. And you guys have already taken that on.
Mr. Mayor, we're working on it. I just want to point one little piece. You know, we're still charging them. We're just not going to shut their water off if they don't pay their bill.
Can we make sure that when they are making their payment, like if we decide, we've decided to not charge them, but can we make sure that they not have to pay like in a big lump sum what they owe us, that we could prorate monthly to make sure that they can catch up?
Sure.
Is that something that we can look into?
Absolutely. So here's a couple things. Number one, I think, and testament to Tim Tomier's leadership on this, he brought it up right away and said, hey, why don't we establish them? So they've already empowered the customer service folks to do that, and so they're working through that. So that's number one. But number two, you know, there's late fees and all this other stuff that normally goes around. We're gonna take care of that. Make sure that folks
that was about what I was about to
dinged.
ask.
No, and again, it's through no fault of their own. We've taken care of that administratively. I hope you don't mind. I apologize. I probably should have brought it to you, but
it's being done.
we felt that was important. The other thing I wanted to mention to you is things that we do control. Are things like recreation centers, et cetera. And so what we've challenged the Parks and Recs folks to do is think about ways that we might be able to help, you know, some of the kids, some of the youth, providing them with activities and things that would be at no cost, up to and including working with our partners at the zoo. So again, those are things that we can offer and maybe help at least soften some of that blow to at least let people know that we're thinking about them during this difficult time.
Can we do recreation centers for free with the federal ID? I mean, is that too hard? Can we do that one?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, that's where we're headed. And the only reason I'm not saying we're doing it is because there's a ton of logistics, but we are headed in that direction and fairly quickly. So we should have something in place this week to be able to deal with that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Can we make sure that there is a way of informing the community about this this help, just to make sure that, you know, you said 100 families out of how many Tucson Water customers that we have. So if there's any possibility of working with our PIO on putting this information out and making sure that people know, you know, call us with the federal ID, we can do this work. And if there's any additional help, I know for a fact that KidCo families some of the families are in monthly payments. So if we can hold on to those as well, we could offer that help. But I really appreciate you all moving on this. It really talks about what great leadership we have in these roles as directors.
Councilmember Durham.
I have several questions. H 2073, vapor products, e-liquids, regulation, permits. Does it stand any chance?
Which one?
I'm going to ask that question about
and
2 or 3 of these.
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Durham, I was going to get to the state stuff and state issues and the bills in a little bit, but I'm happy to take those questions now. Sure? Okay.
Yeah. So why don't we take Fed?
Answers maybe, but
why don't we take Fed, then go to state? So let's finish off Fed.
Okay. So, Honorable Mayor, members of the council, Vice Mayor Fimbres also asked about the recent ruling by a federal judge on the 2020 census and the citizenship question. As many of you know, a federal district judge in New York has ruled that the Secretary of Commerce acted capriciously and arbitrarily in proposing to add the citizenship question to the 2020 census and struck it down. The administration has filed for an appeal That'll go, I believe, to the Second Circuit Court, and we'll follow it there. Again, Mayor and Council have directed us to oppose the citizenship question being added to the.
Well, I missed your last statement, Andrew.
I believe the Mayor and Council have said in the past.
Oh,
that
oppose.
The inclusion of that question on the 2020.
Correct.
So the ruling is consistent with that.
And at the council's direction, I've reached out to the parties in litigation to offer our assistance in terms of joining as amicus. So I will, now that it's headed to the Second Circuit, I'll renew that and see if they want us to sign on.
Great. Sure, go ahead, Councilman Fimmers.
I know that in the past, we've been very cognizant and very vigilant about watching and saving our postal distribution center on Cherry Bell. And I know that the House now has new leadership there, Elijah Cummings. And I would like to submit a letter. I'd like to make a motion that we submit a letter to him, like we did with Congressman Meadows, about how important our postal distribution center is in southern Arizona for us, and say that we support it and bring back the 2 additional duties that we lost, which is our stamp and our local sorting. So with that, I'd like to move that, and we get a letter from the mayor and council supporting the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know if we really need a motion, but.
Oh, you don't need a motion, then it's fine.
Yeah, Andrew, if you could prepare that and get it to me. Thanks.
Okay.
The new.
Okay. Vice Mayor, did you want to do the Union Pacific or the Union?
Your Honor, we had
Pacific?
one more item.
Union Pacific.
Go.
We had one more item. Mr. Pimbers and I had one more item we wanted to talk about.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
The other item that we've talked about today, along with the federal employees and the Cherry Bell, but there was one other item. Tucson is in a very unique position where we could possibly, it's a low chance, but it's possible that we could have a NFL partner just for one season next year.
So, I'm not real tight on the agenda. How is this a federal because it's interstate commerce or national? Okay.
Yeah, National Football League.
Look, here's the deal. Even if we go long, literally, okay. But the deal is this: if we get a team like the Raiders has a national following, if we are fortunate to host them for even 9 football games next season, the economic impact on tourism alone is north of $50 million. That's the truth of it. I'd like to furnish a letter for Mr. Farhang, who's trying to lead this community effort to bring them here, that says he has the support of the city of Tucson. And I'd like to make that in form of a motion.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, what I think is being discussed here is Councilmember Cunningham has laid the framework for a future agenda item, and the manager can, I'm sure, has listened to what's been raised and might take some actions in the meantime with his economic initiatives folks might be whatever would be in the city's best interests.
Yeah.
That is satisfactory. Thank you.
No motion at this time.
One more, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
For the past 27 years, the Union Pacific Railroad has stopped the trains for the period of time that our annual Tucson Rodeo Parade takes place. This year, Union Pacific said they would not stop the trains as they have done previously. Tucson Rodeo Parade has been around for 94 years and is an institution, and the decision by Union Pacific can't go unanswered. I'd like to get us to also jump in and see what we can do for this year, and also make some steps so that in the future we're protected like we are.
Mr. Manager, have you had any conversations yet on this with UP?
So, Mr. Mayor, I called Union Pacific this morning during this meeting. I actually received the phone call, return phone call, and without being disrespectful, I didn't want to answer it, but we'd know, at least I can get a thumbnail sketch of what needs to happen. Obviously, we're talking to the public relations folks at this point. I think that if we don't make progress there, then we'll have to escalate this fairly quickly. And I would recommend that we do that, and I can do that fairly quickly and get a letter from the mayor or signed by the council, whatever the key is, but it will be an important topic.
We can make this issue aware to our congressional delegation here in Southern Arizona. Both Congresswoman Kirkpatrick and Congressman Grijalva can also be help. I know that they work with Ann O'Halloran.
Yep.
And so I think we need to escalate it quickly because the parade is right around the corner. And wherever you can get with it and however quickly you can escalate this to make the congressional offices aware of this issue would be beneficial.
Yeah, that's unusual.
Coming up with a temporary solution for February, but I'd like to see something also being worked on for the future. Thank you.
Okay. Let's head to the state.
Great. So moving on to the state, the 54th Arizona Legislature began on January 14th. The mayor and I attended the opening ceremonies and the governor's state of the state. First off, I do want to say that I've talked about this with city manager. I do want to formally invite any members of the mayor and council, if you're ever interested in going up to Phoenix to visit the legislature during their session. I'm happy to take you and set up meetings, possibly even take you to committee hearings on bills important to the mayor and council. So please reach out anytime if I can assist you with that. And I could also say that the legislators actually do enjoy seeing people from back home, so they enjoy seeing us as well, so there's added benefit. Vice Mayor Fimbres has asked for a bit of a rundown on the governor's executive budget. As some of you may know, the governor laid out his proposed budget last Friday. It does include mayor and council priorities, including increased K-12 funding and funding the teacher pay increases as promised under the 20 by 2020 plan. It does include $20 million for Pima Community College's aviation school, which is a large one-time investment aimed to double the capacity of the Aviation Technology Center. There is $6 million also for Maricopa County Community College for their healthcare training programs. So that's in the budget. $700,000 is in the budget for Nogales to add some cold inspection facilities at the Mariposa Port of Entry. This is very important to the Fresh Produce Association. I bring it up because of Mayor and Council's support for SR 189 and understanding how critical the movement of goods across the border in an expeditious fashion is important to the Tucson economy. There are no HERF sweeps in this budget for the first time in a while. We're happy to see that. Of course, that will depend on keeping the DPS fee in place, and there's some bills on that we'll get to in a little bit. There's also a proposal to increase the balance of the state's rainy day fund to $1 billion. So that's the budget. Vice Mayor also asked about the drought contingency plan. It's true that is... Sorry.
Andrew, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry. Can you talk a little bit more about the... I believe that there's some money included on the governor's budget for additional pay increases for state employees and teachers. Can you talk about that a little?
I don't have a lot of specifics, but I can tell you that I believe about half of all state employees get a pay increase under this budget. And then, like I said, in terms of teachers, again, the increases in pay that were promised last year through the Red for Ed 20 by 2020 are funded in the budget. So yes, they are in line for that portion of the overall 20% pay increase that was promised last year.
But this does not include librarians, nurses, bus drivers, cafeteria?
Yeah, as I understand it,
does not
no.
include? Okay.
No, I think there is some additional funding for capital needs for schools, but other than that, I think the focus of the majority of the increase for K-12 is to fund the promises made last year to the teachers. So moving on, Vice Mayor Fimbres asked about the drought contingency plan. As you know, the drought contingency plan is probably the #1 issue facing the legislature at the beginning of the legislative session. At this point, we're waiting for actual language, legislative language. There'll probably be 2 bills. One is the concurrent resolution that would authorize the state to sign on to the drought contingency plan, and that's an agreement between Arizona, Nevada, California. And then there's another bill that will probably be kind of like a water omnibus bill that will include some of the provisions and agreements and things that need to change in order to make the intrastate agreement work, the movement of water and money and other things to help mitigate some of the issues that'll be caused by Arizona leaving more water in Lake Mead. There is a deadline that the federal government has issued, or at least suggested, that if by January 31st, Arizona does not pass a drought contingency plan than the feds might. So I know there's a lot of momentum and at least desire to try to meet that January 31st deadline. And then Vice Mayor also asked about ID cards. I know that the Mayor and Council have been interested in this issue in the past. There's nothing new in the state of the state. I know Mayor and Council have been supportive of the program that was launched, I believe, a couple of years ago and recently expanded that enables people upon reentry out of prison to be able to secure state IDs before they actually leave prison. It's often an impediment to getting jobs and other services when you don't have that picture ID and that state ID once you upon reentry. So that program is still in place and moving forward. There are a couple of bills worth mentioning. One is actually on the list that I sent to Mayor and Council today. It's House Bill 2215, automatic voter registration. This is otherwise known as a motor voter bill, meaning if you go and get your driver's license or your state ID, you're automatically registered to vote. I know this isn't necessarily about getting or making it easier to get ID, but it is a bill tied to what else you can do when you're getting your state ID or driver's license. And then there is a bill, House Bill 2314. This is not on your list yet. I'm still doing some review of the bill. Consular ID cards. Right now, under state law, it is prohibited for local governments to accept a consular card as an official ID. This bill would not only take away the prohibition, but it would actually require state and local governments to accept the consular card as a form of ID. This is House Bill 2314. No, like I said, it's not on your list today. I need to speak with some of the other cities, and I'd like to speak with the sponsor of the bill before I bring it back. Representative Tehran of the Phoenix area. Okay. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Representative Tehran was the motor voter bill. It's Representative Chavez, also of the Phoenix area. Cesar Chavez, District 29. Okay.
Let's do this. If anybody has any specific questions, let's ask Andrew. Hopefully we've all had the opportunity to review the 30 or so bills he's given us today. I think his recommendations are solid, so we can vote on that to give him direction. But before we do, let's make sure everybody's got their questions answered. We'll go Councilman Durham, then Councilman Kozaczek.
There was an article in the Star yesterday about the Pima River Indian community position on the drought contingency plan. What would you comment on that?
Sure. Honorable Mayor, members of the Council, Councilmember Durham. So the Gila River Indian community plays a large role in the plan that's been devised within the state to, again, to mitigate some of the water cuts that the state is going to sustain under the drought contingency plan. So they play a large role. There's a bill, and I believe the article yesterday references a bill that really has nothing directly to do with the drought contingency plan. It has to do with some groundwater rights issues in eastern Arizona, where the Speaker of the House is running a bill that tries to deal with some of these groundwater rights issues. The Gila River Indian community has said that they see the bill as an attempt to take away some groundwater rights that they claim. And the attorney who represents the Gila River Indian community has said that he sees this as a poison pill and it might lead to the Gila River Indian community pulling out of the DCP. I've not heard anything new on that issue since yesterday, but clearly it's an issue that would need to be overcome.
Okay.
Is that it, Paul?
Paul, anything else, or Councilman Kozaczek?
I was going to ask about that as well. What would be the impact on the DRC if they pulled out?
The DCP?
DCP.
Yeah, Honorable Mayor, members of the Council, Councilmember Kozaczek. It'd be very difficult to do the intra-state plan. The Gila River Indian community actually has the largest CAP allocation of any entity, right? More than Tucson, more than Phoenix. It's about 300,000 acre-feet a year. They do not utilize all of that water, although they do use quite a bit of it for agriculture. That said, in order to provide mitigation or help to the Pinal farmers, which a lot of the DCP is designed to do, quite a bit of that water is intended to come from the Gila River Indian community. The Gila River Indian community would then be paid for the water that they would then give up or not use that could then be delivered. It's quite a lot of water. It's quite a lot of money. How do you provide that mitigation to the Pinal farmers without that water or money would be without taking that water out of Lake Mead to do it is very, very difficult.
So it wasn't real clear in that article what legal rights they allege are being impacted by the state in that proposed bill.
So, yeah, Honorable Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Kozaczek, I don't know the deep particulars on this one, but apparently there are some rural interests out in eastern Arizona who are looking for certainty, they say, on the ability to pump groundwater in that area near the Gila, that eastern edge of the Gila. And so the bill is intended to provide that. The Gila River Indian community says, hold on, that impedes on what we believe are groundwater rights that we own.
Okay. And finally, if you, Mr. Ortega, do write some letter with respect to the Raiders, I need to recuse from that. I can't be involved in it.
Okay. Anything else before we go to the giving Andrew directions so he knows what to do in Phoenix?
I've got one other.
Oh, you have one other.
I've got one other area of things
Sure.
I need to cover. And actually, Mayor, the other day you and I were talking about the Wayfair implementation. And so I would like to cover that just a little bit. And actually, I have Joel Peterson here from City Finance, who I will cover one piece of that for Mayor and Council. So Mayor and Council have expressed their support for online sales tax collection, or TPT collection. We do believe there will be some increased revenue, though not as much as some people would like there to be. But in large part, it's a big way for us to achieve what we consider to be tax equity here in Arizona. So one of the handouts that I gave out today looks like this. This is a new piece of collateral from the League. As you can see, the League of Cities is now partnering with the County Supervisors Association, as well as the Arizona Retailers Alliance and the International Coalition of Shopping Centers. So together with these private sector partners, we're all working together to try to get this online sales tax implemented quickly and easily here in Arizona. So this provides information, and the League is giving this out to legislators and others. Again, I think it provides some of the basics. Happy to provide additional information. The last time I spoke to you about this, I mentioned that there might be a bill, there might not be a bill, might there be a way to administratively just start collecting. At the end of the day, I do believe now that there will be a bill. The bill will provide for what's called safe harbor, which is something that the United States Supreme Court said it wanted to see or expected to see in these types of efforts to start collecting online sales tax. What it'll say is that if you're a retailer and you've completed at least 200 transactions or collected over $100,000 a year in retail sales, then you now have to collect that sales tax, right? So it creates that safe harbor. There's also in the bill, I expect it to have no retroactivity. In other words, you can't go back to sales that you made in 2004 and say, we're going to collect that sales tax now. So that bill has not been released yet. When it does come, I'll make sure to bring it to Mayor and Council. The League of Cities and other cities are working closely with ATRA and other stakeholders on the bill. One other effort, and this also gets back to a question the mayor asked at a previous meeting, what else do we need to do, especially in terms of the tax code, in order to expedite online sales tax collection? On February 8th, the Model City Tax Commission is going to be meeting, and the goal is to try to streamline the definitions of items and what's taxable or not across all cities to align it with the state. That's going to make it easy for the state to collect the tax and then remit the city and local government portions to those cities. It's a big effort. A lot of work is underway to do that. There is one piece of that effort that the League of Cities just reached out to Tucson just within the last day and a half or so, asking for some direction. It has to do with spec building and land. And I've got Joel Peterson here from City Finance to explain the issue.
Good afternoon. Two changes to the spec builder code as it relates to commercial transactions for developers. The first one I want to talk about is called in-place leases. That would be a new deduction for our code that basically it's setting up such that the deduction becomes comprised of the present value of the stream of lease payments up to the first renewal. That could impact our spec builder tax significantly in that in the commercial arena, you might find in some cases leases for a year if you're talking about a lease on an apartment or something like that. But if you're talking about a shopping center or a strip mall or a commercial building, you might talk about leases that run significantly longer than that. And leases that run out past 10, 15 years, whatever the present value of that's going to be a significant number. And that could be a significant deduction for the amounts that are out there. That's pretty much a done deal. They're going to meet on it. Everybody has pretty much been in agreement. There's been some opposition to it and discussion. So basically what's going to happen is that they're going to meet, as Andrew said, and then they're going to probably pass that. Word is that it's pretty much, as I said, it's a done deal. So
hold on a second. Yes. I'm going to ask our attorney. I think I tried to ask him this morning, so now maybe it's at a few hours. I thought to change tax code, you had to go to the legislature. What is this?
The changes to go through the MCTC, the Minnesota Tax Code, through the commission.
Okay, so they go to the commission, but doesn't that still have to go to the legislature?
I don't think that there are certain instances where it would require a statutory change. I don't believe that this, in terms of identifying a deduction, would.
But it's a deduction that significantly affects a municipality's revenue, and that can be done administratively by an unelected body.
I don't know the answer 100%, Mr. Mayor.
Well, we need to find out, and I'm not, I don't care what the rest of these, I am not supporting this, period. Okay? And I don't care, done deal, not done deal. Let me know when the meeting is and where.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, is there a possibility of having us, the mayor and council, take a position against this? Is there any process?
I think that's the purpose of raising the issue here, is they want to give you the opportunity to take a position on the issue, and in the meantime, I'll address the issues that the mayor has raised.
I'm sorry, it doesn't sound like you're asking for our opinion when you tell us
we were told it was a done deal. There is not a done deal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's still
and if the law is that this is the tax law is made by an administrative body, it's definitely not going to be a done deal.
Right.
Because we'll file a lawsuit.
Well, I agree. Mm-hmm. We just need to know where our options are and to make a definitive statement on behalf of mayor and council.
Sure. Well, Honorable Mayor, members of the council, I just want to try to make clear that what the league has presented to us is a question about the city of Tucson's preferences on this particular question. So that's what we're trying to get across. And again, I'm not an expert on the issue, but in my lay understanding, what's being asked of us is, when it comes to collecting the construction sales tax, what is the separate? That's the second issue? Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. Well,
the second issue is the issue that I thought what you were asking the opinion on.
Okay. Great. So, do you want to cover that, the second issue then?
The second deduction has to do with land. Currently, the developers can deduct from their gross sales proceeds on a spec build. They can deduct the cost of the land, and basically the choice in this situation that the league was looking for feedback on was the choice of the going to a fair market value of the land, which would have the effect of deducting the fair market value of the land, which would increase the size of the deduction and reduce the tax, or eliminating the land deduction altogether, which would go the other direction. So that's the feedback that they're looking for. Currently, the city code allows for a deduction at cost.
Mike,
Right. So as I understand this issue, and this is the one I was familiar with that was going to be discussed today, is that currently under the Model City Tax Code there are two options. And as part of the whole attempt to streamline the tax codes, which actually is related to the whole Wayfair issue, and that in order to move to a position where you can tax internet sales, one of the things that the state has to do is streamline the tax procedures so that they are more uniform. And so as part of that, they're trying to shrink down the number of options that cities can opt into under the Model Cities Tax Code. And under the construction sales tax, there's currently two options. One of them were option, I think, M, which is what the city of Tucson has opted, where we allow for the deduction for the value of the land. There's a second option, option N, which actually is, as I understand it, a smaller deduction. That's based on a fair market value of the land as opposed to the actual value that was reported in the transaction.
The fair market value is actually larger.
It's the other way around.
A larger deduction.
Right. So they want some input from the cities that are under the two different options about what your preference would be if there is a shrinking of the options that are available to the cities.
And the purpose of all this that we're talking about is to pre-position the state to pass this out-of-state retail bill. So we may, and earlier somebody said that might be small dollars, so we may be making all these tweaks or making recommendations to make all these tweaks and wind up net losing, even if this thing passes. And we don't know that. We don't have those data.
Yeah, I mean, I know we had this out a little this morning. This is really complicated stuff. It's multi-layered. It's intricate. And the league coming to us and saying, "Oh, why don't you sit at a table for 5 minutes and figure this out?" is not going to happen. Okay, we really need to have that analysis a lot more than what we have. So, you know, I mean, I think, you know, obviously our preference is to keep our tax base as high as we can.
Yeah, and if the sales tax equity thing winds up netting us $100,000 and these other changes wind up losing us $200,000, then screw it. Why would we do that?
You know, unless there's an equitable reason to do otherwise. In the second case, that's a little closer case. In the first case, that's pretty outrageous.
Yeah.
I don't even know if the software exists where if a person in Tucson is buying goods and services from across the country, we get to collect sales tax from that entity. I don't think we get to do that right now. And I think the software exists, but nobody's being forced to use it. So it's going to be a tough deal. From what I understand, this is a national issue, and there's about 15 other cities coping with this, and they're truly trying to figure out how they can collect sales tax based on, I think, the zip code of delivery or the zip code of the credit card used, I think is how they're trying to figure out how to work it.
Who do we have from the city that's attending these meetings or that we propose to have attend these meetings? Anybody? We better get someone there.
Mr. Mayor, no one yet, and keep in mind, this is a request from the league. They have asked us to get back to them, I believe, the 8th. We'll bring this back to you. We'll do more research on it, and we'll make sure we get to the bottom of it, and we'll bring back a recommendation for your consideration. In the meantime, we'll craft some information to educate you on some of the detail.
Yeah, this is, I mean, listen, the Wayfair decision was a big decision. It meant a lot to us, but we got to see it through correctly. I'm sure that, you know, I can't believe that Phoenix and Mesa aren't looking at it as well. I mean, let's try to work with our city delegations as opposed to the league directing us.
Okay, we'll do.
Okay.
We'll have it back at the next study session. Okay.
What else you got?
So moving on to the bills. So at this point in the session, at least as of today, there were 669 bills that have been introduced at the legislature. Many are in the review process. City IGR is tracking about half of them. We're meeting with city staff. I've sent quite a number of bills to our city staff to review them and give me recommendations that then I can analyze and forward on to mayor and council. I'm also meeting with the other cities and other intergovs as well as the league on the bills. Please To Mayor and Council, please, if you ever have any questions about a bill that you hear about, or you want to make sure that a bill is added to the list of bills for Mayor and Council consideration, please reach out to me anytime. And then, as in the past few years, I always send to Mayor and Council, as part of the IGR updates, links to 4 different lists of bills. There's always the list of all bills that have been introduced at the legislature. There's a list of all the bills that the City of Tucson is tracking. Then there's the list of the bills for Mayor and Council consideration. And then I also keep a list of bills that Mayor and Council have taken action on already. And you can always go there to get an update on where those bills stand through the legislative process. Okay. Today on your chart, I've got about 25 bills. Some of them are, I wouldn't call them duplicates, but they're similar bills. I'm happy to, similar to one another, I'm happy to answer any questions about the recommendations or the bills themselves. To go to back to Councilmember Durham's question about the bills that have to do with vaping and e-liquids, I think there is a good chance for bills like that to pass this session. There is quite a bit of focus on these types of products and the proliferation of their use among young people across Arizona. So I think there are good chances for these bills to pass.
Question, your description of H 2073 says minors who possess an e-liquid or vapor product are guilty of a petty offense. What are the further details on the penalties?
Yeah, Honorable Mayor, members of the Council, Councilman Durham, I'll need to get you more information about that. Just for what it's worth, the description of the bills in that summary column, those are produced by the Legislative Council, not by me. So, but they are very helpful, of course. They give you an overview of what's in the bill. I'll provide more information for you about what the specific penalties and provisions are that are, that at least are described generally here.
And Councilmember Durham, if memory serves, for petty offense, they're punishable only with a financial penalty, a fine. It can't be any imprisonment or probation. And I think the maximum penalty for a petty offense is $250. But we'll check.
Kind of like a traffic violation.
Right.
It doesn't stay on the... It doesn't count or doesn't stay on the minor's record?
It wouldn't have any meaningful effect,
Okay.
like as a prior conviction or anything like that.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else have any questions? Councilmember Durham.
Representative Engel's bill, H 2395, auxiliary containers repeal. Does that stand any chance?
Honorable Mayor, members of the Council, I think that one has an uphill climb. I would say that I am pleased by the discussions that I've had both with Democrats and Republicans, especially in the House this year. The House is 31-29, and so I think there is an expectation of more moderate approaches to issues. This is a clear preemption. Our city has wanted to move in this area, but is preempted by state law to regulate plastic bags, and we'll continue to push the issue. I've thanked personally Representative Engel for running this bill, and I'd like to support her again on this bill as we did last year.
I met with some 8th graders a few days ago who were concerned about, who wanted me to ask Tucson to ban plastic bags, and I pointed to the existing law. I'm really glad that she's done this.
Councilman Durham, it's unfortunate that you would have to introduce our young people to the doctrine of preemption, but I guess someone has to do it at some point.
And so, I'm sorry, go for it.
So on S 1009, tobacco products, electronic smoking devices, that would appear to regulate vaping liquids that contain nicotine.
Right.
Right?
That's my understanding, yes.
So it's my understanding that most do, but some contain a very small amount. Is there testing or how is that? You can get back to me on the details later. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Council, is that it, Paul? Councilmember Romero.
I'd just like to recommend that we approve the position in terms of the city either opposing or supporting the bills recommended by the Intergovernmental Relations Office.
Second.
Got a motion and second. Any further discussion on any of these matters? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Good job, Andrew. Other than what the league's trying to make you.
Sure.
All right. Does anybody have any items to remove from the consent agenda? If not, does anybody have anything for future agenda items at this time? If not, we will stand adjourned and reconvene at 5:30. Thank you. Excellent.